It's the conversation, and it's always fun to welcome back people with whom you've had really great conversations in the past, and that's the case now. Dr. Shweta Chakraborty and Dr. Shweta Chakraborty is, in addition to having a really cool name that I always labor to not screw up, it's a little bit longer, is involved in so many things that are of the moment, and they have a lot to do with climate change and global warming, but also human behavior. And as I see the society struggling with both of these things, it's particularly cool that we get a chance to visit with you today. So hello, Shweta, how are you?
Hi, so good to see you.
Shweta, I want to ask you about, you have a podcast, you have a weekly radio show, it's called Risky Behavior. And you also have podcasts. I mean, I think you're something of a real communicator. So I need you to communicate with me how and what is the best way to bend human behavior to accommodate what is an urgent need to address climate change and global warming.
Well, with these wildfires in California that have been taking over our TV screens this past week and last year and the year before, I mean, we can stop having ignition-related events, whatever that might be. In this case, it was the gender reveal party, which the memes across the world making fun of Americans for this new ridiculous tradition that is relatively new in terms of, all the different ways we can market and commercialize our lives. But beyond that, there's other ignition events that we can be much more aware of, like how we treat our environment. We're increasingly interacting with nature, especially during this lockdown. People are biking more, people are camping more, people are hiking more, and all of those are really good things. But there's always counters to the positive. And in this case, the increased interaction with the environment is resulting in recklessness and carelessness that can result in ignitions, like tossing a cigarette, like not putting out a campfire. These are the kinds of things that we as a society should be more aware of and much better evolved towards, because we are just becoming closer and more simultaneous in terms of the different impacts of climate change. And it is just not something that we can be reckless with historically as we have been.
But how to get us as a society and a culture to become less reckless, to become more aware? I mean, all of what you've just said is clearly the case, but it seems as though our challenges are to not act as we did 40 years ago. I mean, it seems as though we have the same sort of disposable, reckless view toward the environment around us. And what I'm asking you as behavioral scientist is how and with what do we communicate to try to change that behavior?
So as much as I wish there was a magic bullet in terms of answering this question, in terms of changing widespread human behavior across the United States, we can't communicate in any one way, because the American public is very segmented, and we all know we're extremely polarized. Leading up to this election, you can tell whether or not what your political beliefs are based on what your attitudes towards certain risks are. This has never been the case before. So if you ask somebody present day if they fear climate change and the risk around the planet warming, or if they believe that COVID-19 is as serious as experts say it is, you can identify where they fall on the political spectrum. That goes to show how political identity influences perception of risk, regardless of what the reality of that risk is. So the same messaging is not gonna work across the board. The American public is just far too polarized. So the best way to communicate the reality of the risk so that people actually change their behavior and we can predict their decisions and their behavioral outcomes is to make sure that the wording and the framing is appropriate for the values that are most important to these different groups. So what is it that conservatives care about? What is it that liberals care about? How do you frame a message in a way that you're really gonna get through? And who is the person communicating? This network, as much as I love the Young Turks, is not the right network to communicate to one end of the political spectrum. And I think we know what that end is, right? So it really comes down to trust in the communicator, and are you framing it aligned to the inherent beliefs that that particular segment of the population holds?
Well, that's a home run thought. I mean, clearly you're right. In fact, I love what you said, and it hadn't occurred to me. It's more than just the message, it's who's doing the messaging or how the messaging is being communicated. I think you're so right. So let me just press you on this and ask, in the face of these wildfires, it seems as though one of the messages that's coming back the other way is, well, it's forest management and it's a poor forest management in a democratic state or whatever it might be. I don't mean to make it political, but it is sort of being seized upon. Even the president, got out of the plane and right away when he came to California, this is just, happened in the last week. He's right away to it's forest management. That's the problem here. And when the issue, of course, concerning forest management involves the feds in large measure. I mean, over half the state of California is federally owned land. So I guess what I'm getting at is there is a way to push back, I suppose, on that. But you see how quickly it becomes a political game, and they hang a lot of what I think is a sort of a logic that's perverted or certainly tortured. On the hook of things that really are not founded in fact.
Yeah, you're giving a really great example of just how politicized science has become. So ultimately, your political identity is actually dictating where you're gonna fall in terms of your response to the wildfires at a political policy level. I mean, that's insane that we've gotten to this point. But again, that just goes to show how strong these various factors that seemingly have nothing to do with the reality of what's going on the ground, the reality of the actual risk, whether we're talking about the wildfires, that's a great example, whether we're talking about COVID-19, whether we're talking about adaptation or mitigation to climate change, your political identity and that is then propagated by Trump really will dictate what you think and what you believe about it. And so what Trump did when he arrived in California, he was trying to unburden his administration of any real accountability. And Californians, even though he was in the state of California and apparently speaking to Californians, was not actually his audience. He was saying what he was saying to reach the ears of those who have been relatively cocooned from some of these impacts on climate change. And what I say over and over again is even if you haven't directly experienced flooding, droughts, severe wildfires, storm surges in the East Coast, there is no such thing as being relieved of these impacts now or in the future, because we are part of a connected ecosystem. And even those who seem as though they are going to be relatively safe from some of these increased frequency and high probability events as the planet continues to warm, they have another thing coming. And this is why it's really important to not just kind of allow ourselves to give in and say, okay, well, we're not gonna reach some of these people that are just gonna go along with and believe whatever it is that they're, and in this case specifically, the Trump Republican administration is putting forward. We can't afford to do that because everyone is truly going to be affected by this.
You referenced something along the way there that is troubling to me, and that is the dismissal and worse than dismissal, the demonization of science. It starts with, I think, scientists or scientific authorities, and then it extends to entire fields of science, of infectious disease. I mean, there's certain climate science, certainly, and now that seems that climate science has sort of been in the barrel for a while now. I wonder how to fight back on something like that.
Yeah, and this has been, again, one of those things that scientists have known for decades. And so when some of these wildfires and the increasing probability and frequency and intensity that we're seeing year after year is apparently shocking the public, this is something that the climate science group for decades has warned the public about and has warned policymakers about. None of this is surprising. Just as the infectious disease outbreak, COVID-19 wasn't surprising. That's why it's so important to listen to science and scientists, because there is no dogma involved, it's data. And we have to make policies and decisions based on data, because anything else is going to result in the situations we're seeing now, which is again, being really unprepared for simultaneous massive impacts like Hurricane Sally hitting the southeast of the United States while these wildfires are going on. And our government can't afford this. We only have so much of a budget of disaster relief and recovery, which is now, thank goodness, as of a couple years ago, being allocated to wildfire, just generally land management around wildfires in California. But that is too little too late, right? Because there has been years of building up that has required maintenance from the west of America, California, Oregon, Washington, but they haven't had the budget to be able to do it because so much of the money was going into relief and recovery as opposed to proactive preparedness. So if we don't think about all of the impacts occurring simultaneously and proactively preparing against them, then we are going to find ourselves running to catch up as we are right now and trying to spread thin the funds that we do have for disaster relief. People deserve disaster relief, but can we afford to keep doing this?
I mean, you make the case so passionately and so accurately, and you even leave out what's happening in the Arctic and the breaching of the Arctic now, and Californians are being choked by some of the worst air in the world as a result of the blow off from these wildfires. So, I mean, it certainly seems like it's a moment in time for a lot of these cases to be made.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's just been going to increase again in frequency and intensity, and we're gonna see more simultaneous impacts at the same time. We need to get smart. We need to get proactive.
I put my credibility glasses on again because I just want to thank you. I wish we had more time. I really love that you think about how to communicate. And you said something, I have to say, I mentioned it once before, but in this conversation, who is communicating is as important as in the equation of how to communicate. So Shweta Chakraborty, thank you so much. Risk and behavioral scientist, climate change expert. And again, your radio show every week is called Risky Behavior, and I believe you still do the podcast, don't you?
That is actually the podcast, yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay, great. So
thank you,
check out Risky Behavior on the radio and on the podcast, and thank you for joining us. We always appreciate a visit with you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Sasha.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.